You said about your colleagues being joining there. So you can tell us the name already. Rahul? If he's on mute again. Please unmute him.
Yes, sir. Rahul. So is Rahul and Rahul Jain different? Because I have two.
No, Rahul Jain. Put unmute Rahul Jain, not Rahul.
There's one Rahul also.
And
Stop sharing.
Saurabh, stop
Yes,
sharing
sir.
and start recording.
Yeah, the recording is on, sharing is off. Great.
I'll put Rahul sir in spotlight.
No, put Fazeen in spotlight first.
Fazeen first and then Rahul.
Okay.
Fazeen and then me and then Rahul. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Whoso is remember, whoso is speaking, that person should be in spotlight.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Fazeen, let's start.
Unmute. Happens.
Mute yourself again.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Fazeen Haber. I'm a TY BAF student. I'd like to welcome all of you all today to the alumni lecture series. Today we have a very special guest with us. We have Mr. Rahul Jain, and he will be talking about financial turnaround and restructuring, doctors to an ailing economy. I would now like to call Professor Pooja Lalwani to introduce and give a welcome address.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third edition of the third lecture for our alumni lecture series. Like we have mentioned before, who better than our alumni to train our students and to guide them. So we are very happy to have Rahul Jain with us today. On behalf of HSNC University, HR College and Self-Finance Department, I would now like to ask Rahul Jain to start with Rahul sir to first introduce him and then Rahul Jain to start with this.
Oh, thanks a lot for the opportunity to introduce my own student, and who has been always ready to come to college and teach. And whenever I had a word with him, whenever he was college, said I'm there to give back to the college. So I'll not take much time because it's his time to speak. Simple things which I know, that he was a student from BFM, and he's done a CFA also. So currently he's working with in the reconstruction and financial turnaround team at Brexon and Allied Partners LLP. Prior to this, he was associated with a multinational $1 million real estate focused structure, finance and private equity fund that looked after last mile financing requirements of stressed residential real estate projects in major micro markets pan India. He's also a parliamentary debater and avid corporate quizzer. Self-Finance Department cordially invites you for this session, Rahul. And the floor is all yours. You can start and mentor and guide the students with all your experience.
So, firstly, thank you so much, Pooja ma'am. Thank you so much, Rahul sir. Thank you, Poonam ma'am and Shweta ma'am for being on the dais as well. You guys know that you all have always been instrumental in whatever little I've achieved so far, and it's great to be back. It's great to be giving back in whatever little capacity I can. Having said that, I think, sir, the profile is pretty technical, so it becomes difficult for a lot of first and second year students to understand what I essentially do. So, I'm almost your age. I am not someone who's in his late 20s. I'm still in my early 20s. I'm almost in your age bracket, and I'll make this session easy. It wouldn't essentially be a seminar where I'm giving lectures on technical aspects. I'd be giving you a story. I'd be taking you through a process towards the end of which I'll be, entertaining questions from your end. And I want to hear from, what you guys have to say, what confusions you have at this point in time. And as Poonam ma'am said, she's always the one who's challenged me, who's really pushed me beyond my boundaries. So I'm hoping for, a few tricky questions from her end as well. So before I begin, as sir pointed out, I currently am working at Brescon and Allied Partners, a niche company that looks after an extremely small niche within corporate finance, that is financial turnaround and restructuring. How did I land up here? It's a long story. I'll take you through a process like it's, just to ease it up for you. I was in third year of college. I was doing my graduation in financial markets. Rahul sir, Shweta ma'am, Poonam ma'am were my faculty. In third year of college, I got this one. So like, we've always seen these movies, right? We've seen Wolf of Wall Street while we were in college. We've seen Wall Street. We've seen Boiler Room. We've seen Wizard of Lies. We've seen Wall Street Money Never Sleep. So there was always this one factor about finance that intrigued me. It's always that one factor about Jordan Belfort, when you see Wolf of Wall Street, about that life, about that fascinating stories that he has to tell the world, about the money he makes. So as a 19, 20-year-old, those things attract you. Those were my inflection points. Those were the points that, first drove me towards an idea that, this really sounds fascinating. This is interesting and this looks great. And I don't know what it is, but I would love to know what it is and probably pursue a career in either one of these fields. So in third year of college, as I said, I had no idea about what investment banking was, but because the term is so fancy, I wanted to be called an investment banker. At 19, I couldn't expect myself to be hired by a Morgan Stanley or, a Goldman Sachs for that matter, because of lack of experience, because of lack of, correct knowledge. I applied to a set of boutique banks. I used to attend college till about, 11:30, 12 a.m. in the morning. Post which I took up this small internship with one firm at Narvan Point, wherein at the age of 90 till the age of 20, word. It was something that always fascinated and intrigued people. It was something that was fancy and which was cool. So at that point in time, I got an opportunity to basically help a lot of startups raise capital and fulfill their dreams. In the process of helping them raise capital, I understood the intricacies of finance on the equity side. So guys, I will be throwing a few words at you. Don't bother to write them down. Just sit back, relax, right? So I basically got into the equity side first, wherein the idea was that, because a startup essentially cannot raise debt, the best source of raising capital to fund its operations would be to carve out a part of his ownership and give it to a third person, in respect of which take in some money, scale your operations, and then sell your company if you've scaled it enough, or turn that into a behemoth. So for a year and a half, I was involved in the equity space. Probably a year and a half after that, I thought that, because I interact so much with funds, I really want to know what it is to be on the other side. Right now, at 19, 20, I'm raising capital from funds. At 21, 22, I was on the fund side to understand how do these guys give capital? What do they look at while they're giving capital? In finance parlance, in simple terms, it's called the buy side and the sell side. The sell side is people who are into advisory services, people who advise a particular group or a company or, a corporation to raise capital, who advise them on how to navigate a particular crisis. And the buy side is people who give money to basically companies. Sell side orchestrates the two. It links the two. So earlier I was on the sell side. I did equity raising. For a year and a half, I was on the buy side, where, as sir mentioned, I was a part of, a multi-million-dollar structured finance fund, wherein we were involved in making big ticket investments between 50 to 500 crores to stuck real estate projects pan India. Real estate in India largely happens in 6 major micro markets. One of them is, of course, MMR, the Mumbai metropolitan region. I was concentrating on this particular phase. We closed a couple of deals in like my 1 year tenure, one of which was with Seth Klarman, one great financier from the finance world down in the West. He runs a company called Bopost, a 450 crore transaction, which still remains to be the highlight. Having said that, in the last year or the third year or the year that probably was instrumental in me taking up this webinar, was when I joined the last side of finance. So I did equity, I did buy side, now I come to debt. Now, every corporation, while it goes through a particular journey, faces its own ups and downs. The ups can essentially propel you into a different hemisphere. The downs basically nosedive or completely devastate or destroy a company. It is while a company is going through its downs, that is when we enter as advisors to turn around that company's operations, to help the company align its skill sets and its cash flows financially, and to get the company equipped with the right skill set to essentially get into the next leg of its growth. This was a brief or an introduction of what I have done, what I have done over the last 3.5, 4 years. And now I'd come to the main crux of why we meet today, that is financial turnaround and restructuring. So, I have been told that I can't essentially take names. I would have loved to give you guys case studies because that is what intrigues or gets you guys onto a particular concept or, resonate with my thought process. However, I'd still make it convenient. There are a few examples in the corporate world, right? One of which is the elder Ambani, Mr. Mukesh Ambani, who uses debt to his advantage to an extent that he makes Reliance Industries a company which has the highest market capitalization globally. At one point in time, Reliance had basically had an extremely bloated balance sheet. This is in 2019, probably a year back, an extremely bloated balance sheet with, a lot of analysts carving a cast of doubt. Will Mukesh Ambani essentially be able to navigate his company through the regular interest payments? Because he'd taken up that debt to basically scale up Jio, right? And on the other side of the spectrum, you have his younger brother, Anil Ambani, who again was in the communication sector, who took up significant amount of debt. But because of ill servicing of that debt or because of not using debt to the best of his abilities, was probably burgeoned by it and currently has eroded a big part of his net worth. So on one side, you have the elder brother. On the other side, you have the younger brother. One using debt to his advantage and carving a niche for himself. The other basically using debt and digging his own grave. What's the difference between the two? Not just the efficient utilization of capital, but also figuring out how he'd be using capital to bolster the growth of his company. Will he be able to service it well? And will he be able to repay at one point in time? As I think Ray Kroc. I kind of have this tendency to read a lot. So there was this one book called Leverage, which starts with the first statement saying leverage is like a double-edged sword. If you use it to your advantage, you're able to annihilate the other person and your company is going to stand out because you've used it, conveniently, you've used it to the best of your advantage. However, if you're unable to use debt to your advantage and if debt catapults your down drain, then in that case, that same sword ends up killing you and does not leave any leeway for your growth thereafter. The only options left then turn into insolvency and under the various frameworks provided by the Reserve Bank of India, right? Where does Brescon enter? Where do we enter as, probably solution providers? We enter as solution providers when the second case is visible. When we see someone turning his existing debt into a burden, that is when we guys enter and we provide our services. The services that what happens, guys, when a company essentially defaults on his existing debt, right? We've studied this in undergrad. When a company defaults, there are three alternatives. One, the bank or the lender, whoever the lender is, an NBFC, a bank, a financial institution, whoever has given money other than the way of equity, would have three alternatives. One, he would basically sell the asset. He would recover his money. Assets generally are given at a certain LTV, a loan to value, which is 50 to 60%, which is there is a 40% equity component in whatever asset you're purchasing given the debt. Second option is that if he thinks the asset is not movable, it is not something that can be easily sold, for example, in real estate, right? The asset for the debt you take is the inventory which is currently under construction. So you can't essentially sell that inventory in its current state and stage because there is going to be no buyer. There is going to be no one purchasing it at this point in time. What do you do then? Then you have an alternative to essentially go and knock the doors of the IBC framework, the Insolvency Bankruptcy Code, or the NCLT framework, wherein you go and tell your lenders that, this is a problem. When the lenders go and tell the regulators that, see, this is a problem I'm facing with so-and-so borrower and I want a solution for it. However, in the recent past, since its implementation in 2016, what has happened is the insolvency framework, of course, it's there in place. Of course, we have a robust mechanism via NCLT and NCLAT, both the main tribunal and the appellate tribunal. However, there are a few bottlenecks or a few loopholes which need to be plugged in that mechanism. And at that point in time, what happens is we have a third alternative. That is, we try to involve a third advisor who would come and advise the company and the lender as an intermediary and suggest a course of action that protects value for both the stakeholders after understanding the current ground reality. For example, in today's day and time, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of times that we've never seen before. You must have seen Miss Sitaraman come and give these elaborate lectures, almost every fortnight, or the RBI governor, coming and giving those lectures as well, wherein he keeps coming up with more and more monetary policies, or frameworks, prudential resolution norms. What's the purpose of those resolution norms? The purpose is simple, right? They identify that today we're in a problem which is a huge mess, right? We are growing at a rate which is half of what we were growing at before demonetization. We need to bail out the economy to an extent that the entrepreneurs, the employees, and all the other stakeholders in the ecosystem are thriving and are able to carve out their growth to the next stage. As of now, that is stalled. That is stalled because the pandemic has not only, resulted in a lockdown. What it has also done is destroyed the morals of promoters. Promoters, in true sense, are people who run a company, not the CEOs, not the MDs, the ones who call the shots, the ones who work above the CEOs and MDs. There has been a declining order book. There has been a declining confidence within the ecosystem. There has been a declining amount of capital entering India. Largely, India always, was fortunate enough to see a good influx of foreign institutional investors and FDIs and a lot of money coming from, from the outsides of our country's borders. Lately, we've seen a temporary stall in money coming from those hemispheres as well. So, all in all, we know that we have a tough time ahead of us. To protect or to, help us navigate through the tough times, the government and the other regulatory bodies come up with schemes and frameworks with an idea to bail out the economy and to pump in enough capital, either by reducing the repo rates, either by reducing the bank SLRs, or by coming up with certain prudential norms that help you restructure an asset a certain way. So far in India, ever since, I think, there was a time when we had corporate debt restructuring in 2002, 2003. At that point in time, if there was a company which was going through distress, we used to invoke the CDR norms and we used to help the company get out of that stress. In 2011, we had another framework wherein if the company was in stress, there were a few provisions or a few guidelines within it which we used to use to basically get the company out of stress. In 2019, we had the prudential framework for resolution of stressed assets by the Reserve Bank of India, wherein, again, if the company is in stress, it gives you a guideline or a framework wherein you have 4 or 5 options, right? I wouldn't go in detail of those options because they get extremely technical at this stage. I would just give you an overview as to what these options were, right? So we can essentially, ask for an extension of a loan tenor, or we can ask for a moratorium of sorts. We can ask for additional capital, anything that helps the company face that transient problem, right? And currently, in wake of the pandemic, on the 6th of August, we had another framework given by the RBI, wherein we again give a one-time resolution or a one-time restructuring plan to existing people or existing companies which are in debt, right? So our work largely lies in one of these multiple frameworks by identifying that the problem faced by the company is of, mammoth levels, and we need to find a solution that helps the company at a minimum cost to the lender. Because as an advisor, even if it's the company who pays me and I work fiduciary to the company to help it out of stress, I cannot let go of the lender, who is also a very important stakeholder. Because tomorrow, if I cast a restructuring or a resolution plan, wherein I am helping the company face the problem at the expense of the lenders in the Indian ecosystem will not thrive. Let alone thrive, they will not agree to a resolution plan. The resolution plan will fail, right? So our job lies in identifying a risk-return matrix, wherein I know that, see, this is the problem the company is facing. It may not be able to repay its existing debt obligations. And if it does not do that, the lenders will basically invoke its default clause without even a cure period, right? In that case, I identify a solution or a resolution plan under any framework that fits the bill best, and come up with a plan that helps the lender, that helps the corporate, that helps the other stakeholders within the ecosystem get out of that transient problem with adequate headspace, right? So that is where we as restructuring or turnaround specialists come and add value. Now, giving an example of how this works in real life, say, for example, in today's day and time, real estate as a sector is massively hit. That, I'll give you examples that you can relate with. There was a point in time in Lower Parel when places like Worli had rates per square feet that ranged between 50 to 60,000 rupees each square feet. Today, because of the impact of the pandemic, because of a certain slowdown in the real estate sector, because of sentiments turning negative among potential buyers, because of a trend among millennials to rent instead of own, what has happened is we have started losing equity value in each square feet across major micro markets within the Mumbai metropolitan region, be it a posh area like a Worli, Prabhadevi, Lower Parel, or be it an area which does not command those high rates per square feet. For example, something beyond something on the outskirts of Bombay, something not in the heart of the city. Both of them have taken a massive beating. Real estate historically had a lot of money coming in from outside. It was the only sector that garnered about 6% of India's total GDP and about 7% of India's total employment, and contributed significantly to our growth curve. Now that we see that this particular asset class is under stress, we know that we are probably doomed unless we find a solution for this. So probably I wouldn't give you names, but yes, we do have cases wherein there are these developers, these real estate cases that come to us with an idea that they have lost a lot of their equity value. They don't think they're able to get those rates per square feet again in the near future. Banks and NBFCs that have lent to them are also scared because the cover that stood at 2x or 2.5x on day one currently stands at 1.2 or 1.3x. So at that point in time, they're also worried that they will not be able to recover their entire capital. Hence, we are tasked with a solution providing framework wherein we need to venture in, come up with a resolution plan or a plan wherein we align the stakeholders' interest and recast the cash flow basis the on-ground reality. If I don't think 50,000 is achievable in 5 years, I will recast my cash flows to probably 25,000 or 30,000 over a 10-year period, assuming that the lender will agree to that extension of the loan tenor, or will agree to that moratorium, or will agree to that additional credit facility, or will agree to any other plan that I propose, right? So ultimately, our job is very simple. It's to be creative. It's to basically identify and accept the fact that problem has erupted, and we need to find a mitigative solution. Because unless I do that, there is going to be erosion of value for both the lender and the borrower. And we as a country will probably become an NPA debt load, right? Today, just to clarify, NPA is basically to lay it out for you, is a non-performing asset debt, which for over a 90-day period has been in default. Today, major banks face massive NPA debt loads. Some of them have gone out of business or probably are on the verge of going out of business. However, some have managed their capital extremely well. Again, without taking names, you know which banks I'm talking about when I say that these are basically revenue churners over a 15, 20, 25-year-old period. And the stock market prices or the track record that these guys have had say it all. However, India will not survive only if 5 banks are able to manage NPAs. India will only survive if all banks are able to keep their NPA payload in check. And we as advisors, as we've coined the seminar, are doctors to an ailing economy. We try to balance the NPA check with on-ground realities and try to figure out a mitigative way wherein we're able to preserve as much capital as we can with minimum burden and minimum hit to the lenders and minimum stress to the borrowers, right? So it's a win-win scenario, which more often than not, a resolution provider or a restructuring company is able to achieve. Otherwise, they go out of business very soon. This largely remains a niche setup because this is something that requires a truckload of experience. It's something that requires good relationships and good contacts within or across the banking ecosystem. Hence, today, if I had to lay out 4 or 5 names, there are just a handful of players that are into this one particular space, that are into helping companies. However, at this point in time, because of the stress caused by the pandemic, you may see a lot of these green shoots emerge across the Indian financial landscape. And that largely, guys, is what we mean by financial turnaround and debt restructuring. Having said that, there were a set of questions that I had before this, which were, when I posted this particular flyer on my social media pages, I had a set of questions that came in right after that saying, how do we identify such opportunities? Or, how do you know that where the next opportunity is going to come? Because like, was I lucky enough to enter into a restructuring space because I could, visualize the industry going into a downturn and probably enter into a space where I thought would be, would basically support a lot of work? Or was it just plain luck? I think we leave all of that for questions, and I'll take it with questions one after the other as well. I'm guessing Poonam ma'am has a set of questions ready already. So we'll start with those and we'll come to the others as well.
Thank you so much, Rahul. It was very good to hear you speak after such a long time. And you always were a fabulous speaker. So that goes without saying how well you spoke.
Well, when I'm joining back college, we need good speakers for the competitions.
Sure, so whenever I think, whenever you have Econundrum or probably, any event for choice next, you can always count me in.
It's like once an HRI, always an HRI.
Okay. So Rahul, I think you have really well explained the concept of reconstruction and bringing back the economy on back. What are the measures and how you find the opportunity with such areas? And I feel those who are the students who have attended today and those who are going to see it on YouTube after you put a recording are definitely going to benefit with all whatever experience they've shared with us. And definitely, I know there may be a lot of questions across. There are students on finance and financial markets from your course only who are going to ask you a lot of questions. Okay, so it's now the floor is open and Rahul is here with us to answer all these questions. Any questions are there, you can put in the chat box.
Just make Poonam ma'am the host.
I did. I
Yeah.
already did.
So in the chat box, you can put the questions and Rahul will be happy to answer it.
Okay, guys, I think the floor is open for Q&A, whatever questions you have. Okay, Rahul, can I start where you ended?
Sure, ma'am.
Was it plain luck or was it something, like what was it?
Plan.
Yeah, was it a planned move or was it just plain luck?
Ma'am, to be honest, in hindsight, I don't know as well, because I don't think, anyone could have seen the pandemic come unless I was Bill Ackman, who could basically hedge through credit default swaps and make $1 billion. No one could have predicted that there was going to be a pandemic wherein the economy would be in general stress. However, ma'am, one thing that, of course, I've shared with you also earlier is that I have tried to aspire for great mentors throughout. This was this one, thought that my seniors earlier told me, I think, the entire batch above us, that for the first 3 years, don't chase jobs, just chase mentors. Don't chase companies, don't chase brands. Because it's very simple. See, when I was, ma'am, 19, 20, you can't expect a 19, 20-year-old to basically go out there and close deals and, raise capital for startups that have no proven track record. I chose a person who really believed in my skill set and who really pushed me, who helped me incline and understand the different aspects of finance. After that, I had another great mentor under Mr. Goenka, Mr. Amit Goenka, who also taught me a great deal about, how real estate works, how lending works, how giving equity works. And lastly, I was a big fan of Mr. Gangwal, who currently happens to be the promoter of Presscon Allied Partners. I was basically chasing him for the better part of the last 2 years by writing him mails that said, I really want to learn from your skill set. And he happened to be a maestro within the restructuring space, having done that for about 25 odd years. So I was chasing a mentor. That mentor happened to be in a space that was chasing growth. So I ultimately happened to chase growth, but I was always chasing a mentor. I was chasing a person. And that, ma'am, it was, I think, me chasing someone, then me being plain lucky.
Great.
Very well said. So I think that is the takeaway, that you should chase mentors. And I guess you've done your share of hard work, because it's not that everything has come to you easy. And I personally know you, so I can tell that how hardworking you are. Okay, the next question, Rahul, is, so what are the requirements for getting into these companies? So I think they are asking what qualifications per se you need, like.
More than qualification, I feel there should be more skill sets.
Yeah,
Rahul, you can talk on this.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both, with degree to pursue and what skills to improve.
See, it's simple. I am not I don't belong to that school of thought, which really thinks that degrees equate to success. I don't think that has happened in India over the last 60 odd years that, you've had the BSc in full form. Neither do I think that you should essentially be uneducated. I think there needs to be a fine balance between identifying what your skill sets are and what more do you need to get your objective. So see, I'll give you one simple example, right? In my line of work, or probably in finance in general, two things are extremely important. One, your ability to develop great financial models, right? Financial models in Excel are, I think, the bread and butter of what any finance enthusiast, basically does day in, day out, in his job. And two is to have great, great understanding of basic accountancy. Because unless you understand how the three financial statements work in tandem, in together and in isolation, what the different schedules basically add to each and every financial statement, you wouldn't be able to do justice to your profile, and you'd be a liability more than an asset to your company. Because they will not come and teach you financial modeling, they will not come and teach you accountancy. They expect you to have those skill sets. So if you can probably develop those skill sets by reading a book, that's, I think, the best. If not, get into a professional course or take up something like a BAF, which builds your accountancy skill set. If you want to get into core finance, take up a BFM, which brings, plugs your financial skill set by giving you an idea about markets in general. And but across both financial modeling and you being proficient with Excel is extremely important. There are two other sides to it. One is being a good speaker. Because, I have seen this across the board that no matter how great your financial models are, no matter how good your idea is, you will not be able to convey to the person if you're confident in your approach. If you know that, you're backed with a good skill set, or you're backed with great facts, or if you're not able to articulate your point of view well. So it's very important that you develop your skill sets. Otherwise, you'll always be limited to the back end. See, you will always get a job. Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs will always hire you for their back end. But that jump from the back end to the front end is not only a factor of experience, it's also a factor of how well spoken you are and with how much confidence can you articulate a particular point of view, right? Because they want people who can go out there and close deals. As I said, you've seen these movies, right? I think most of the students today have seen each and every movie. You've seen how Jordan Belfort goes and sells stocks, right, in Wolf of Wall Street. You've seen how it happens in, Wall Street Money Never Sleeps. You've seen how it happens in Boiler Room. You need to be selling, right? And as one of these guys said, the basics of finance are ABC. Always be closing. Closing is selling. Unless you sell, unless you have a good skill set, nothing else matters. So I think, if you're driven in that direction, you're almost there.
That's right. It's really good because ultimately it's come down to where you close everything and get the revenue going for the company.
Right.
Yep. So around one question to you, as you recently said about the real estate industry, and it's a part where the stocks are not being selling. Pandemic has also created problems regarding people like to sit on cash and not go for buying property or making any such investments. Recently, there was a cut in the stamp duty by the Maharashtra government. So, do you think that will ease out the scenario, or will bail out the real estate part?
Right. So, sir, I think that cut in the stamp duty happened like 2 days back, wherein they got the stamp duty from, I think, 5% to 2%, giving a 3% relief.
Yeah.
Right. So, sir, in this case, of course, see, as real estate as a body is governed by a lot of these SROs, a lot of these self-regulatory organizations, one of them being NAREDCO and the National Real Estate Development Council, and the other being CREDAI. So these are basically bodies that have been run by veteran real estate promoters. They have made representations to the government, and they have a long list of, basically they call it a wish list.
Yeah.
We want a reduction in stamp duty. We want a reduction. We want you to basically allow one-time restructuring. We want you to pump additional capital. So I think, sir, this to an extent does relieve some stress. But what I believe, given my experience and some understanding, is that this is not enough. We also require the government to come up with another fund that helps stressed last mile residential projects basically complete. Because, if I give you stats, just a ballpark figure, roughly 30-40% of Bombay's inventory is unsold and is still under construction.
True.
which basically occupies a lot of capital, and a lot of capital is locked. Unless you're able to complete that inventory and sell, the economy will not move. So it is imperative you have a fund that keeps plugging money into these stuck projects. SBI has a fund called Swami right now, SWAMIH1, which is a five, which basically gives these small ticket investments to stuck real estate projects in the last mile. But that is not enough. We require more funds. We require more money coming into the system. We need to ease the FDI norms. Stamp duty is just one of the 10 things we need. But of course, it's a welcome change.
That's nice. Also, Rahul, regarding when you talk about the economy, we have heard in the pandemic, the government taking measures and efforts for bailing out the economy. A 20 lakh crore package was also announced by the finance minister towards bailing out the economy. So what do you think in real sense, has that really impacted the economy? Because we're talking about startups, and because see, those are already big players in the market, they'll not get affected that particular extent which the startups and the MSCs will get impacted. So what is the take on that?
Sir, I think, India largely, as has been pointed out multiple times in the past, doesn't work on the government's mercy. India as a country works on its animal spirit. It works on a concept called force entrepreneurship, wherein whatever the government gives us is just like an additional incentive. I think even in this case, the 20 lakh crore package, I don't know how effective it will be, because it takes some time for packages to basically get into the Indian economy and embed itself completely. It will take some time to basically reach the grassroots and for us to see what changes are. But largely, I think, sir, India will be well on its path towards the end of FY22 to really get back and phase out the effect of the pandemic. These packages help to some extent. For example, that one-time restructuring circular on the 6th of August does help relieve stress on a lot of corporates, be it below 25 crores, above 25 crores, upwards of 1,500 crores also. But ultimately, it will come down to what the promoter, what the entrepreneur wants to do, how well he can navigate the crisis. So, for example, I'll give you two examples right now. One, as I said, is real estate, which is stressed to the core because of the pandemic, and they have no way out. The other one sector, if you look at markets also in the last 3 months, I think from the date of the lockdown, since March 23rd till date, there has been one sector which has outperformed all other sectors, two sectors for that matter. One, of course, being pharmaceuticals. You've seen how, Laurent Pharma, Alembic Pharma, Ipca Laboratories, and a lot of these other companies have outperformed the market by a significant CAGR. Same is the case with another sector called fertilizers. Today, Zuari Agrochemicals, companies like Deepak Fertilizers, like Mangalore Chemical, like Coromandel International have given record returns. So it's, and it's not like, these sectors have been given any additional bailout. It's just that they found an opportunity. They could replace imports from China via internal, procurement of raw materials. They could improve their margins and reduce costs, and they could give better returns to their stakeholders. So I think, sir, policies will take time to come in action. Until then, it needs to be the promoter that really drives the growth.
So that's what important is said correctly. That's managing your business and knowing cost reduction, cost in the best possible way, bring out cost efficiency, and ensuring that you have the bottom line with you.
The bottom line always there, yes.
Yeah. So, any more questions are there, ma'am, the chat box?
Yes,
Poonam,
yes.
Yeah,
Okay. So the next one is an easy one. Rahul, which 3 books would you recommend to a finance enthusiast?
So I would recommend. So see, firstly, if it's for a finance enthusiast, the number one go-to book remains The Intelligent Investor. I know it's been spoken about a lot. I know it's been, emphasized time and again by a lot of people. Ki pado. And I know it's an advice that all of you also have. But guys, trust me, when Benjamin Graham in 1920, 1930 identifies the key principles of finance and highlights margin of safety as a key principle, that can't be refuted even in 2020. It's been over 100 years. It is what helped Warren Buffett probably amass a wealth of roughly $80-90 billion, and also give a lot of people at Columbia University the skill sets. So I think Intelligent Investor remains number one on my list even today. Number two is this book called Value Migration. It's not spoken about a lot. It's written by a person called Adrian Slivutski. The book is Value Migration, that highlights one component which is very unique. If you would have seen, ma'am, there was a time when we had, photography, where we had cameras. where we had Kodak, where we had Polaroid and all of these companies capturing a lot of market share. However, after a point in time, once Steve Jobs came up with the first iPhone in 2007, you could see that camera became an integral part of a phone. And to an extent, what the phone's camera gave you in terms of efficiency was better than what Kodak or Polaroid gave you in the first place. So value migrated from one industry, that is photography, to another industry, that is smartphone, and completely erased one industry altogether of world maps. So I think that book helped me highlight an understanding of where next to invest capital. Where do you think the next growth journey is going to happen? For example, today we see artificial intelligence, we see fintech being the next big thing. However, it takes some skill set, it takes some learning and some reading to identify key that is where I'm going to be making my next billion, right? So I think, sir, that book highlighted how value migrates from one to the other and how to identify the migration of value. And the third book was this book called Snowball, which was basically written by Alice Schroeder, and it's a biography of Warren Buffett, the life and the times of Warren Buffett. So I think from an early age, the skill sets that Warren imbibed within himself, one of which was reading, and how it helped him become a billionaire, and how patience as a virtue helped him amass 90% of his wealth after the age of 65. Today he's about 90 years old, and the man is still going in, full. He's still going all guns blazing, right? You probably know in 5 years he'll probably take over Jeff Bezos, looking at how his investment in Apple has played out. So I think that's the third book recommendation. So in order of priority, or in an order of hierarchy, first book is in The Intelligent Investor, just to get your basics right. Second book is Value Migration by Adrian Sliwitsky, and third book is Snowball by Alice Schroeder. The fourth book, not a book, I would not give you a book because I think only 3 books were asked. The fourth thing is the letters to shareholders that Warren Buffett posts and uploads on his website. He has a website called BerkshireHathaway.com, wherein he has a segment called Letters to Shareholders. Every year in his annual general meeting at Omaha, before that, he writes a letter to all his shareholders identifying 1 or 2 key tenets of finance. So I think, you probably put the entire course of BFM on one end, the 3 years of BFM on one pedestal, and you keep the 40 years of Buffett's letters on the other. You'd probably see Buffett's letters overpowering the 3 years of BFM when it comes to imparting financial knowledge. I think that's a qualification or a degree in itself. So, ma'am, 3 books, and that last recommendation is, what I'd suggest.
Okay, thank you, Ralph, for that one. The next one is, how did you land your internship in your 3rd year?
So, I have a tendency of shooting random mails. So, I'll give you a trade secret of mine. I think a lot of you all will also accept it from now, and I'm giving it out for the first time. On LinkedIn, there is a plugin which is called Lusha, Lusha, which essentially helps you get the email IDs and the contact details of almost anyone who has an ID on LinkedIn, even though you've not uploaded it, right? So I happened to understand Lusha back then. I understood that there is this software called Lusha, which I can then plug in onto my LinkedIn software. And I went, and I knew my skill set, and I knew my limitations, that I could never go to a Morgan Stanley, and I didn't want to, because I really wanted to go and hustle at a boutique setup that helped me learn more, then probably do a kind of inferior job at a bulge bracket bank. So I basically first went to LinkedIn, made a list of boutique investment banks all across the city, particularly in my vicinity, the ones close to my house. Got their email IDs, got their contact numbers from Lusha, send a cold mail to everyone. That's all. This is me. This is my skill set. This is what I do. This is my CV. And I had no experience before that. I sent out about 15 odd mails. I got reply from one. And that one place is where I essentially went and interned. So I still am grateful that they believed in someone who had no idea about what he wants to do. But if it wasn't for them, if it wasn't for my mentors then, if it wasn't for them to believe in me, I would not have the little I have achieved today. So I think it was just cold mailing, man. I just gave out a cold mail.
Okay, Rahul, the next one is, according to you, since you spoke about value migration, according to you, which industry would be the driving sector post the pandemic? We want to know your views. Where do you see the next billion coming in?
Uh, this is a tough question, ma'am.
Told you I'm not going to go easy.
Right. So, see, ma'am, I think largely one sector that, we will be seeing, which is going to be coming out, is going to be the pharma sector. Pharmaceutical, and particularly within pharmaceutical, there is a sub-segment called API, an active pharmaceutical ingredient. I think that is one sector that, will probably put India at the helm of world, or probably at the helm of world pharmacy. I think going forward, that is where a large part of India's wealth will be concentrated towards. That is going to be one sector that is going to attract a lot of foreign capital. That's going to be one sector that will probably make India known as a medicine provider. Today, we have the Serum Institute of India, which is the world's largest vaccine manufacturer. Probably very soon, we'll have a cure for diseases that probably the world doesn't have a cure to. We'll have our own US FDA that regulates and gets these drugs out in the public domain. We'll have low-cost medicines for the same. We've done this in the past. I think since 1995, since the early 2000s, we've had a tendency of, like, pharmaceutical entrepreneurs have a tendency to outperform global peers, right? I remember in 2013 or 12, there was a company called Valiant Pharmaceuticals in the West, wherein a person created a drug which I think cured one incurable disease, and he priced it at $1,000, which people then couldn't afford in the US. Some local company in India provided a substitute for that drug at, I think, 1/4 of the price in Indian rupees, which essentially comes to less than $100, and started circulating the same drug globally. Of course, there were IPR regulations and stuff, but the point is that we can achieve what the West have, and we can do it at a faster rate. We have probably, like, I think even in case of Covaxin, the vaccine we have with Oxford, the one that India is developing with Oxford, SII, will also be India's first, ingrowth into becoming a world leader in vaccines and pharmaceutical drugs. So I think, ma'am, API within pharma is going to be India's getaway from the pandemic.
Thank you for that one. Any other questions? I think. Should I take up more questions?
Rahul, one question is there. You talked about the banking means banking insurance being the pillars of the economy somewhere. So with respect to the NPS happening across, what measures should be in place, or what kind of policy should be in place, so that you said about that it should not be 4 to 5 banks managing the NPAs. So the steps taken, like merging of the banks, etc. Will that be a boon to the economy, or will that be the bailout thing?
So merging of banks essentially helps a bank consolidate its position. And of course, it also helps, a lot of other intermediate aspects within finance and banking. However, to address the crux of your question, I think, to address the problem of NPAs in India today, there needs to be, especially in public sector banks. The private banks have been doing a fair job on that one domain. On the public sector side, without taking names, we need to have a structured framework before we give out money in the system. Today, as we've seen in cases in the past where there have been these gross mismanagement of funds and people getting into frauds and all sorts of other unethical or immoral activities, there needs to be a plug, which is by having a robust framework on day one. How do you give out capital?
Right.
Or what metrics, what risk parameters do you check? How do you monitor the existing exposure, which needs to be done not on a quarterly basis, but on a monthly basis? I think a quarter is a long enough time for a bank or for a company to, siphon off funds from here to there. You need to do it on a monthly basis. It needs to be more robust on the bank's end. However, I think the problem of NPAs should not make a bank fearful of promoters, because if that starts happening, then the growth will stop.
Right.
Banks shouldn't be fearful of lending money on the account ki NPA ho jayega, I will be losing out a big part of my capital.
True.
That will stop growth altogether, because private equity funds or hedge funds or mutual funds will not keep pumping in money in the system forever. Banks will have to play a very critical role. They are doing that. They are well, I think, in the last 1-2 months, ICICI Bank, Yes Bank, Axis Bank have been recapitalized hugely. I think they've got this, QIPs of 15,000 crores, 20,000 crores. They have a lot of money. The only plug right now is to have a robust framework. know what parameters will help me monitor my money, where am I not losing my capital, but balance that with not being fearful. Don't be fearful, be smart is my honest, I think, my opinion on this.
I'll take the next one. What do you think, Rahul, of Yes Bank's idea of starting a bad bank by transferring all their bad loans?
But I think, ma'am, I think bad bank is already a concept which has been pivoted in the West. It is something that probably can help a bank restructure his existing accounts or his existing exposure from the good to the bad money. But unless we have a particular guideline or a framework that isolates how a bad bank will work, what amount of provisioning would be required when it comes to a when it comes to a bad bank, the key managerial personnel who would be envisaged or entrusted with the task of managing the bad loans, I think all of that will play a very critical role as it's happening in the West. If we're able to incorporate and isolate that entire framework in India and with that same efficiency, I think we'd be in good space. But historically, we've not done well copying. We've not done well being second runners. We've done well being the front runners in a particular aspect within finance. I think, the current governor of RBI is well equipped to come up with a better framework to identify that, if you have a bad bank where you're transferring the existing non-performing exposures to a separate entity, will we be able to mitigate the issue with adequate provisioning? I think that would be the inflection point. If we're able to manage that well, I think we'd be in good space. If not, then that idea wouldn't stand.
And Rahul, what are your views on the telecom industry in the long run? I
think, ma'am, the telecom industry has today been limited to 2.5 companies.
Yeah.
I don't think it's even 3 or 4. I think it's only 2.5. We have Mr. Ambani running a behemoth called Jio. We have Mr. Sunil Bharti running Airtel. And then we have half a company in Vodafone in Idea. Please don't hold me to my words. These are just opinions. I am not quoting anyone. But yes, I think we have 2.5 companies in the telecom space today. And currently, there is an AGR issue which is going on with the Supreme Court, wherein there is a significant burden on both Vodafone Idea and Airtel. I think, ma'am, to maintain us, to avoid monopoly in a sector which is going to be India's driving force. See, as you said, ma'am, as I said, API and pharma is one. The second driving force is going to be data. Data revolution is going to propel India into the next leg of growth. Moreover, at the cost at which data is being provided today, we are not far from a fact where I think 90-95% of India, even in the rural areas, has a cell phone. Today, if you limit that entire growth journey to only one company, we will not be doing justice to the Indian economy. I think the Supreme Court, although it is completely harsh on its stance when it comes to Vodafone Idea and Airtel today, where they have to, make due the AGR payments within a particular framework, but the amount is large. These companies have reported thousands of rupees, thousands of crores of debt every quarter, loss every quarter. I don't think at this point in time, if we burden them with, a constricted payment period over the next 3 or 4 quarters, we'll be able to mitigate the problem of monopoly in the Indian telecom space. I think we need to give them some relief there. The Supreme Court, the apex organization, needs to be a little lenient and let those people thrive. Let that 2.5 become 3, 4, 5, and even 10 in the recent future. We need more telecom players. I think, if you only have one player running the Indian data ecosystem, of course, it's great for that, for shareholders of Reliance Industries, but it's not that good for other promoters who also want to enter the Indian telecom space and have a share or have a bite of that telecom journey, of that telecom dream of India in the next 5 or 10 years. I think it's a gold mine, and I think we need to open it up. We can't limit it to 2.5 or 3.
By the way, Rahul, Anaya listened to the entire session, and she has learned that she's going to shoot across a cold mail to you pretty soon for internships. You heard that, Anaya? And you have to connect on LinkedIn. So she's already geared up.
Hopefully by then, ma'am, I'll be in good position to start. So probably she'll be my first hire. We'll work closely on that.
Yeah, definitely. So it's like pre-booking.
Rahul, I think so. Enough question been asked, but one question more. You always talk about startups, and you talk about that bring up new business ideas, becoming a job provider than job seeker. And then the question comes about finance. Then the question talked about the debt equity part. So, as an advisor, as a fund provider, what factors you look basically when you're funding a particular startup? So there are a lot of questions here because there are BMS students across, there's a BMS student across who talk about startups and the entrepreneurship, because today all people talk about entrepreneurship. So the main question comes with the money part, the finance part. So what factors you look at when you look at providing finance?
Good question, sir. So, sir, it depends. It depends on the idea that has been put forth in front of me. For example, if you're limiting yourself to a startup which has not been funded before, which has just started, it's still in ideation phase. Then in that case, my perspective of looking at that idea is completely different than me looking at, say, for example, a company which is a unicorn, something like a Paytm or something like a Big Basket. Then funding that startup is an entirely different scene as compared to what it is when it comes to me as a fledgling. So before we get to what I look at, it is important to isolate what stages do we fund at. So there is first, sir, as we start, we have a seed stage wherein an idea is still in its ideation phase. We don't have a prototype. We just have an idea. We think this will be the next unicorn. We think it will be the next billion-dollar company, but we don't have any framework for it yet. Of course, we have a business model, which is a visualization, but we don't have complete clarity कि इसका future क्या होगा. So in that case, I look at the person who's running the show there. I would first want to bet on the person. It's the case with any company, even in private equity today, when it comes to giving out 500, 600 crores, we look at the promoter. The integrity of the promoter is extremely critical before you give out any money. Does he have the vision and the drive to take the company to the next level? If he has, I will be comfortable giving money to a great promoter with an average idea than to an average promoter with a great idea. Because if it's a man with the correct skill set, he can turn around shit and sell it as gold. But if it's a man with below par skill set, he can't turn around gold. He can probably, devalue gold and turn it to, anything but gold, or like have that value. So on that front, sir, my first look at the seed stage remains the integrity of the promoter. If a startup comes to me at, probably he has received the seed or the angel round, he has raised the first round of capital, he has a prototype in place, he knows what he wants to do, he has some revenues to show. Startups don't generally have a track record. They have just started. And he has some revenues to show. So in that space, given the revenue that is in place, I would probably, ask or chart out a financial model of certain project. What will it look like in 5 years? And will he be able to sustain his current market cap or, his current market sizing? If the market sizing increases going forward, I will bet money on that company. If he has a good team that can scale the size, I will bet money on the company. If I don't think it's a company that can scale well in size, I will not even look at it even once. Right? So we have cases where a company has raised capital in the seed stage, but as it reaches the, I think Series A or the first round of good capital financing, there is no vision. Vision is not just having a dream. A vision is a dream which is backed by great fundamentals, which is backed by great research and a great team. Right? Unless you have all the pillars in place, there is no question of a company or a startup being successful. Right? Today, you can come and give examples like, an Apple started in a garage. He raised capital from that one guy, and that one guy got an exit for $1 billion. But you need to understand the Apple was run by Steve Jobs, who did not know what engineering or technology was, who knew what marketing was more than he knew about tech. Right? The person bet on Steve Jobs. He didn't bet on Steve Wozniak, right? Who was the tech guy. So the idea remains on carving a vision. I need to know that the vision is backed with realistic assumptions and with, a great fundamental skill set. If that happens, I take it to Series A. Then from then onwards, it's a valuation game. Because if a company has received Series A funding, it's assumed that he has given good revenues. He has a good EBITDA level. Startups aren't generally profitable. So, looking at the PAT or the bottom line in startups will not add value. You look at the EBITDA levels and you fund basis the EBITDA levels only. So I will look at, startup at Series A. I will see, has he been able to achieve his milestones in the past? If he has, and if the valuation is aligned with what I look at the company being, I will put in money in Series B, Series C, Series D, so on and so forth, with a vision to exit with a 5-year plan. So an exit is very critical. I get an exit by selling a company. For example, Sachin Bansal, Binny Bansal, they were founders of Flipkart. They got an exit when they sold Flipkart to Walmart. That is when both of them got a huge share of capital. Both of them started their own different ventures and they got out of Flipkart, and Walmart took over Flipkart. Or the second part would be an IPO. today if I think I'm not being able to sell my company to another player, can I push it for an IPO? Can I list the company and get public shareholders to take an exit? If that's okay, I will look at that. And the third one is that given the current Series A, Series B framework, do I see the company being taken over by another company? For example, not a financial investment, a strategic investment, right? Will I be able to basically, for example, what Jio is doing right now, Jio Platforms runs a lot of different companies within its holding company, which has a lot to do with AI, a lot to do with model Indian furniture, all of that. So in that case, if I'm able to basically identify a strategic investor, I'll sell it out to him. So all these things are very critical, sir. I think my vision of a promoter, vision of the idea, and the future exit plan.
True. So this correctly said, find out who's behind the curtains.
Behind the curtains, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So that's why we have lifting of corporate wheel in the law part wherever anything wrong goes up.
Wherever wrong. There are so many examples where, the company has, again, without taking names, I wish I could, but I don't want to bear the implications of that later. So there are a lot of case studies in the Indian ecosystem where you have, great companies being massively funded, but because the promoter's integrity was not right, the company held it downwards and a lot of people lost capital. These are companies where even private equity funds put in money. So they can also make mistakes. It's not like even, only retail investors make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. But mistakes wouldn't happen if you were mindful of the space the promoter is ethical or not.
That's really, really well said on that, Rahul. Thank you so much. I feel that we have answered enough questions. Poonam ma'am, any more questions are there? Because I think it's enough time.
Ma'am, I hope your questions are answered. They were not challenging enough.
No.
So we need to have a next round of a session for the challenging questions, isn't it, Rahul?
Sure, ma'am. At your convenience.
Rahul, can you tell me one more thing? Like, we've learned valuations, that valuation of goodwill, valuation of shares, and all the textbook things that we learn in the Mumbai University curriculum. Do you think when you go back to the corporates, it helps or it doesn't help? Like all your package or studies put together, do you think you always revisit them or it's a completely different space out there?
Ma'am, I think, it's not just Mumbai University. Even if you study from Delhi University, Shriram College of Commerce, or even if you go to probably any other undergraduate degree, right? They equip you with theoretical knowledge, which is important. I'm not discounting that in any way. However, what I think is that, education needs to be looked at differently going forward, because, if I was taught financial modeling as a part of my undergrad course, instead of, computers, or instead of, coding to a commerce grad, because coding will not help me. Financial modeling in my computer lectures will, right? So if I'm taught financial modeling, or if I'm basically allowed to understand, real life case studies by understanding what is happening in the real world, putting that in my curriculum and then highlighting the key aspects, what went wrong, how to analyze it well in my undergraduate course, I think, I wouldn't have to shoot out cold mails like a naive person at 19. I would have been able to tell them that, dude, I know financial modeling, I know valuation, I have so much market knowledge, all of that. So I think all of that would help a person start, right? Given the fact that now I think we're HSNC University and we're not under the ambit of, the larger university now, I think, going forward, ma'am, if you're able to integrate financial modeling, if you're able to integrate reading of newspapers as a compulsory Viva-driven subject, where you ask them questions as to what happened in the economy 6 months down the line, right? If you keep students on their toes, I think we'd be able to mitigate that gap that lies between theoretical and practical training today in India's financial ecosystem. So I think, these things would help. Of course, what you're saying, valuations, goodwills, and this and that, all of that helps to give you a theoretical angle to it. But when I enter the job as a 21-year-old, when I enter the work stream, I don't know how to look at a company and value, because, in papers, we are given a question. Jahan par sab data diya hai. We have the data there. We know the company's enterprise value. I know the company's equity value. I know the company's cash. You can find out the debt value, right? Because it's a very stringle formula. In real life, things don't work that way. You need to identify the equity, enterprise, debt value, cash, looking at statements. which I think we didn't have exposure to when I was graduating, which was 2.5, 3 years back. However, I don't know how things work today. So, but I think, if that would have been there, it would have certainly made some difference.
To tell you, Rahul, in the HSN University, as said, we are now under the new university, and all the syllabus and all the financial aspects we're told right now regarding financial modeling or having advanced Excel for that matter, or having areas of such as reading newspapers or doing live projects as such, has been given a thought on and will be implemented in the times to come, especially at the second year and the third year, where we're going to learn. And of course, which I totally agree with you, that an BAS student should be more focused on Tally and SAP courses rather than doing a plain IT.
Right.
Okay, so we have to.
Rahul sir, can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
So Rahul, the previous question I asked about the gap, now I want you to mitigate the gap. I want you to be the solution. So there was a reason I asked the previous question, because if I'm teaching, let's say, ratio analysis, or if I'm teaching, all these things which you are saying is theoretical knowledge, would you be able to do a session wherein you take an annual report and tell them actually how to study it? Just one, so that then they can follow with all the annual reports. Then I can make it a live project that, throughout the year you have to pick up 6 annual reports and dissect it for me and do a fundamental analysis.
Ma'am, just to add on, I already worked with Rahul on that part, and we'll be doing something so that we come out with the best interest of the students.
Yeah.
So, like Rahul said, whenever he's free, whenever he's able to do that, certain small things, because now we are consistently looking at having more interaction with the alumni who are in the corporates, who are people who are then the corporates, who are mentors, like how Rahul had, he said in the beginning, and the parents also who are then the corporates. So we have conducted an entire series, taking various topics. So one day you can come, Rahul, and talk about the balance sheet part, the ratio part of it, or how actually taking, if you're allowed to take names and allowed to take the case studies. And so you can take a session where you show how actually you value a particular company or fund or that process can be shown, if possible, to you. We can take this ahead, and later when university opens up broadly in the times to come, we can have pure certificate courses also coming on this. With you being the mentor there, Rahul, it's now your time to be also the mentor.
Yes.
And
So I'm still very young to be mentor to anyone.
What I'll say, Rahul, it's about people have got feedback from the students. That's what we want recently who are there in the market doing good. We don't want too old people because we don't gel up with them. Generally, that's a statement being
It's
done.
difficult to connect with the people.
connect with
then
them.
becomes difficult. Yes.
Right. So that was statement being done. But I'm not quoting it, or I'm not saying that this is right. But yes, the students want people who are recent and who are their age and their age bracket, what you said right from the beginning, that I'm your age bracket only. So they gel up with you more and learn from more. So it can be whatever experience so far, it can be shared, it can be created module part, and then delivered to them so that they benefit in times to come.
Right. So also on that point, also to answer what Poonam ma'am said, one thing, that I was thinking about it, yesterday, last night as well, that it would help if we help our students understand the fields within finance. If we tell them what equity research is, if we get them equipped with what wealth management is, what portfolio management is, what is investment banking, what is being on the buy side, what is private equity, what is a hedge fund, and what are the opportunities within each. So as a 21-year-old, when I get out of the education system, I have a complete idea of, the different verticals available for me to pursue a career, right?
True.
I think that is also a gap, because I understand, because, in I think, financial markets, my program, we did have separate subjects at debt markets, equity markets, this and that. But, vocationally, there is still a slight gap from what I studied in 2018 to I think what stands in the real market today. So I think we should also, inculcate that one key bifurcation of verticals within finance, because it's extremely wide. What I do today probably wasn't even in my books, that financial restructuring or turnaround can also be a separate vertical within the sell side of investment banking. So, and these things will keep evolving. Today I have turnaround restructuring. Tomorrow I will have fintech. I will have artificial intelligence entering finance. I will have robo advisory. I won't have portfolio managers anymore. I will have robots giving my clients advice on how to create an investment policy statement. So I think, all of that will also need to be, I think that would be important or integral going forward.
See, that's what the problem is. Now the change has become constant.
Right.
So we also we have to always keep on toes and always keeping on incorporating what is there, what change, what the market expecting as robot advisory or fintech coming up. So that's why people like you who are there doing well, learning there from the market, can also come and mentor our students, mentor your students, I can say, in times to come also. Okay. So I think, ma'am, we are done with the questions.
Sir. I'm really
Yeah,
sorry
I
to
guess,
interrupt,
yeah.
but I really have one question.
Yeah. Go ahead, David. Go ahead.
So, okay, with all these, high level conversations, I just have very basic question. What exactly kind of skill set do you require? As you said that you didn't have any specific skill set while you entered the market, while you entered and first internship on Nariman Point. So what skill set do you think a person would require to, have a much better vision or a much better outcome while he enters that kind of an internship? Or what topics do you think he should cover before, even applying for an internship, so that he doesn't have that kind of problems in there?
Okay. I'm sorry I didn't get your name and I can't see you on screen.
Okay, I'm Devik and I think my video is on. I'm sorry.
Okay, sure. So Devik, see, I'll just make it very simple for you, right? See, I'm guessing you're in second year or third year of college.
I'm in second year.
Second year, right? So Devik, see, at this point in time, try to focus on understanding more about the economy and get a hang of reading newspapers. I remember when I first read the Economic Times, in the first year of college, I could understand barely 20% of it. 80% of Economic Times bounced over my head. I couldn't understand anything, right? Second year, third year, that understanding became better, right? And that is one thing that, helps you really understand how finance in the real world operates. Today, when you hear about Vodafone's AGR dues or you hear about any NPA, automatically the concept of provisioning enters your sight.
Right.
You have adequate exposure of the ecosystem, right? So firstly, start reading any newspaper. Don't probably even go to a Times of India. It wouldn't help. Go to an Economic Times, read that through and through. Start reading the Business Standard, Business Line. The Mint is a great skill set, or a great tool. Having said that, point number 2 would be learn Excel. In second year, learn how Excel operates, because no matter how basic it sounds, on your first day of job, you'd be asked to probably value something. Valuations don't happen, as I said, they don't give you a question, they give you a company. And they tell you, Rahul, this is the company, go get data from the stock exchange website. The financial statements are there. And now start valuing the company. At that point in time, I was confused. I had no one to teach me ki yaar value, because we value company basis a question, right? So at that, I think it's important that you understand Excel well. You take up a financial modeling course. A lot of courses are available on the internet. I have done one of these courses called the FMVA, the Financial Modeling and Valuation Analyst by the Corporate Finance Institute. I did it online to understand corporate modeling, financial modeling under different industries. That helped me to an immense level, while I was making financial models for my clients at the end of the day. And today, be it a company that has a turnover of 50 crores to 5,000 crores to even 10,000 crores for that matter, the only thing remaining constant is a financial model. You need to tweak it and you'll be able to value anything on the planet, right? So learn financial modeling, read a lot, and not just newspapers, try having mentors in books. In second years, finding mentors in flesh and blood is difficult, because these people in the industry won't give you time. They won't, consider you anything. For now, find books and make them your mentors. I maintain a small library in my house wherein I keep reading a lot. And I have a set of authors, be it Peter Lynch, be it Warren Buffett, be it Ben Graham, be it, Adrian Sliwitsky, be it others who, Alice Schroeder, be it the ones who came after her. Keep reading, right? And try to aspire and, imitate their lifestyles, right? Snowball to an extent helped build the habit of reading within me. When you read that Warren Buffett had more knowledge than you at 23 had when he was 20, when he was 19, 20. I think that automatically pushes you towards reading more. So read a lot, read newspapers, read books, and learn financial modeling. I think these 3 skills at your age would be more than sufficient. Everything else will come on the job.
Thank you so much, Rahul. Poonam ma'am, over to you.
Yes, I think Rahul, we've stretched beyond time because the students have a lot of questions. Anyone else? Any more questions?
I think everyone's done with the questions.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Thank you so much, Rahul sir.
I think
would-
there was someone who was talking. I'm not sure.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's just an
All right.
eco part.
Okay, Rahul, thank you so much for your time. Now I will call upon Farzeen to formally propose a vote of thanks.
I would actually like to call Shweta ma'am to give the thanks.
Okay,
But
yeah.
on behalf of students, I would definitely say I think we've all learned so much. And as you said, you're not that much older than us, but I think I was just thinking while you were talking that you have so much more knowledge than all of us at this stage. Like I'm a TY student, but I feel like there were so many things that you were talking about that I need to really look into. So I think it's great, and I think we're all very grateful that you could take out the time to talk to us today.
I think this is listening directly from the horse's mouth. Immediate feedback. Rahul, look how effective you are, and that's why we insist on having you more often. As in when you can
Exactly.
give us time. Yeah.
Absolutely, ma'am. I'm
Topic
always
is
a servant to
your
college.
choice. Yeah, topic is your choice. Whenever you can make it, be it a month, be it 3 months, be it 6 months.
Absolutely, ma'am. Whenever you need me.
Next topic we can take Rahul and talk financial modeling.
Yeah,
Next
exactly.
topic.
Yeah, exactly. Financial modeling, since you've already explained the relevance of financial modeling so much, it's so important. So
And
No,
as far as
whatever
I've realized from
take
students'
away,
reaction, they don't want the session to end. So,
Yeah,
which is very
Ma'am, they
rare.
really don't.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Just going.
Yeah, but better. Yeah, he'll come again. Don't worry. I have his phone number with me. Don't worry. He'll come again.
Rahul, even I'll enroll for financial modeling, I think, because now even I need to learn it.
So, ma'am, the tables will turn then.
Yeah. Definitely.
fine. Well, Rahul, it was a great session, very informative
so.
session, and sharing such a great knowledge to the students, the practical aspect, they what really skills they really need in the current scenario, be it, as you mentioned, that they should be knowing financial modeling. They should not be just running behind the big organizations. It should be chasing the mentors, and you being one of the prospective mentors, what we will be having very soon with us. So making them learn the communication skills, the importance of ABC concept, that was really nice, and also explaining the practical aspect of financial restructuring, because since we've always read it all in the books till now, so how it is a niche area and how you as a specialist or a solution provider has really added value to the companies. So extremely helpful and very, very informative and insightful session, Rahul. Thank you so much for being here, and we look forward for many, many more sessions like this.
Thank you so much, Shweta ma'am, Poonam ma'am, Rahul sir, Pooja ma'am. Thank you so much for having me here. It's always a pleasure, coming back to college. Thank you, Rahul sir, for having me here. And as I think even the students said, I have always been and I will always be a servant to college, because I think a lot of my skill sets have been built here over 5 years. Be it talking, be it speaking, be it debating, quizzing, anything. The clubs at HR or even the faculty, if it wasn't for these things, it wouldn't have been for me achieving the little that I have.
That is so sweet of you to actually.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
There are a lot of compliments that are coming in the chat box. Unfortunately, only the host can see. But thanks a lot, Rahul.
We'll send that. We'll mail it separately, Rahul.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
we'll-
We would love to send it
Right,
across
sir.
to you and share.
I think
with
we should post it on a social media page.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
us. Yes,
I
we
can,
should do that.
I can probably, story that on my Instagram story as well, once you guys share that with me.
Yeah, I like
Yeah,
it.
I guess
Great,
we'll do
great,
that.
great.
We'll do
Okay,
that.
Rahul.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much,
I
everyone.
think there is just one question which someone's asking. Would you be able to take that? Because it's just come. if you have the time.
Yes, tell me.
If one wants to pursue investment banking, which courses or online courses would you recommend?
Guys, I am not a big fan of online courses, to be honest. I don't think I gain a lot of knowledge through online courses. I think I learn more by hustling and struggling. So I probably read, I see how, what the last transaction happened. For example, if I was a student today and if I wanted to learn investment banking, I would go and understand that, dude, how the hell did Mukesh Ambani raise some $1.25 billion in middle of a pandemic, right? That is investment banking 101. I would probably try to understand ki yaar iska banker kaun tha, how did he raise so much capital? Was it Morgan Stanley? Who did he raise capital from? At what valuation did he raise capital? So I think that is where my learning happens. I don't think I learn through teaching virtually. I learn more through understanding real life scenarios. So guys, if you're taking it from me, it may not work for you, but for me this works. I isolate a carve out from the paper. I study what happened behind that deal, and after that I try to frame my own analysis and my understanding that, dude, if Mukesh Ambani was able to raise capital, why weren't the others able to raise capital? And then it occurs to me that he has a brand called Jio, he is Mukesh Ambani, he has an elaborate team, he has an investment banker, he had a certain valuation, he's made a separate company called Jio Platforms, and all of that thoughts keep coming. So I think that will happen with experience. That will happen, once you start reading. So guys, the key is reading and the key is articulating. So just, I think, stick to that. Everything else will fall in place.
Yeah, totally agreed to it,
Thank you so
Rahul.
much.
Thank you so much, Rahul.
I think we
Again,
should
I'm
end.
speaking.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thank
thank
you
you.
so
This is
much,
the third
Rahul.
time we are saying thank you, and then we are again starting.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you,
Thank you
Rahul.
so
Thanks
much
for
your time.
joining. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you,
bye, Rahul.
Rahul.
Thank you, everyone, for
Bye.
joining in. Bye, bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
I'm going to end the session.
Yeah, I'm doing that.
I'm